Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Inter-American Development Bank. Today we have the honor of hosting the President of the Republic of Argentina, Mr. Javier Milei. Please keep your mobile phones on silent mode to avoid any disruption. Interpretation is provided. Channel 1 for English, Canal 2 para Español. And now I invite the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mr. Goldfajn, to give the welcoming remarks. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Buenos días. Good morning, bon dia. Señor Javier Milei, Presidente de la República Argentina, es un enorme placer y honor tenerlo acá.
Mr. Javier Milei, President of Argentina, it is an honor and pleasure to host you and your sister Karina and the Minister of Economy and the spokesperson and of course our friend Ajay Banga. I will speak some English and then go into Spanish.
Has now been in office for just over a year, and he's already tackled many difficult challenges head on, and he has been producing tangible results by pursuing bold economic reforms. We all know recurring economic crises have limited Argentina's economic development. Breaking free from this history requires bold reforms. And that's exactly what Argentina government has undertaken. President Milei has tackled Argentina's fiscal deficit, a chronic and very difficult challenge that caused Argentina problems for generations. He took a large primary deficit to a sizable surplus. And the monetary financing of this deficit by the central bank has ceased. I remember, President Milei, when we talked, I spoke at your inauguration when I was with you, and we talked about the efficiency gains in fiscal spending, an estimate of the IDB of 7% for Argentina. Those are the inefficiencies that we found. I have good news. We redid the calculation, and now the inefficiencies from 7 has now reached 3.5%, partly because of the reforms undertaken. But still 3.5, still way to go. Over the past year, the government slashed public spending by around 30% in real terms. And the program of streamlining and simplifying regulations in Argentina has been remarkable. Will have effects in the short run, but also in the long run. And the results are there. We are an evidence-based institution. When you see inflation going down to close to 2%, the lowest in 4.5 years, and we've seen the real indicators rebounding for months, employment, real salary, investment, those are evidence of the reforms working. The IDB has been closely working with Argentina. This year, for example, we want to continue with helping Argentina reforms, enhancing fiscal efficiency, and the quality of public spending, working with citizen security, among other priorities. And very important, we want to continue to focus on the private sector-led growth, which is key to Argentina's growth. Last year, our private sector arm, IDB Invest, was actively working in Argentina, 800 million in high-impact projects. For 2025, IDB Invest wants to analyze over 20 private sector projects with about $1 billion. These investments aim to support infrastructure, energy, telecommunication, agribusiness, mining, financial institutions, and the world, including the United States, look for secure supplies of lithium and other critical minerals. we are supporting 3 major lithium and copper projects. As you know, Argentina is home to the world's 3rd largest lithium reserves, and it's a key player in critical mineral supply chain. This perfectly illustrates the case of Argentina as a model. It illustrates the adjustment, but it also illustrates what Latin America and the Caribbean needs, which is a vibrant private sector that prioritizes growth by offering safe and reliable global supply chains in critical areas. IDB Invest is uniquely positioned to promote this by leveraging its new business model and current capitalization process, which will double its size in the next few years. We are working with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in areas that are key to promoting prosperity. And as we all know, the more prosperous Latin America and the Caribbean is as a region, the safer and more prosperous the whole hemisphere will be. But I know the person you really want to hear is not me, but Argentina's President Javier Milei. So President Milei, we are very happy to welcome you to the IDB. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or as I like to say sometimes, hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation to speak about the features of the Argentina model. And my presentation consists mainly of 4 parts. A first one to do with what we call the moral foundation of our model, which refers to the guidelines on the basis of which our policies generally and economic policy in particular are structured. After getting into this on a more abstract level, we then move on to what Argentina did for the past 100 years, which made the country sink. Once you understand that link, you can look at the starting data and the policies we implemented. And from that point on, we move on to explain how we intend to generate economic growth. And along those lines, the basis of our model is the idea of libertarianism as defined by our greatest representative of the ideas of freedom, Dr. Alberto Menegas Lynch Jr., who says that liberalism is absolute respect for the life project of others based on the principle of non-aggression in defense of the right to life, liberty, and property. Its institutions being private property, markets free of state intervention, competition understood as a two-way process, not the neoclassical approach, but the Austrian school approach, the division of labor and social cooperation. And this is a system in which economic success has to do with serving others with goods of a better quality at a better price. And this system, which would sound abstract, actually relates to the application of components from all policy areas. And we're going to focus today on the economic side of things. What I'm going to do now is describe the process of Argentina's decadence. And in so doing, we will see how Argentina has systematically destroyed these concepts, and we systematically shifted away from the liberal paradigm to make Argentina a true disaster. That phone is a riot, isn't it? That's my phone, isn't it? No, let me tell you, we have announced that we were going to broadcast this on my Instagram channel, and there's always some bloody fool, because the one who's doing this knows what they're doing, and they know they're interrupting the lecture. But anyway, that's Argentina for you. It's got a whole lot of nitwits who do this kind of thing. And sometimes we call them octopus heads. You know why? Why we call them octopus heads? Because an octopus has its digestive tract housed in its head. So their head is full of waste. So, that said, to those nice guys who are trying to interfere and bother during the conference, you may know that during one televised debate, I had coughers, people who actually coughed while I spoke. So in Argentina, anything can be expected. So that's the octopus head for you again. And it won't stop because they don't want this being broadcast. Anyway, basically, what we see as the symptoms of Argentina's past decadence have to do with, for instance, the fact that Argentina lost a lot of ground in terms of per capita GDP. If you look at Angus Madison's estimates, in the late 19th century, Argentina used to be one of the countries with the highest per capita GDP in the world. It was a land of prosperity, of plenty. In fact, it competed neck and neck with the United States. However, after starting to gradually espouse socialist-colored ideas, Argentina became a true catastrophe. And when we took office, Argentina was clearly below average. And this, of course, translated into a substantial increase in poverty, although official accounts show poverty levels slightly above 40%. That is actually a semi-annual average. And when a variable is showing an upward trend, if you look at the December figures and the average for the last half of the year, poverty is being underreported. Not that it's a lie. It's got to do with a methodological matter relating to how averages are calculated. And another thing that statistics fail to reflect is the fact that Argentina, having had price controls in effect, Argentina was experiencing a shortage, and that is not reflected by the indicators. So one thing that you could find is that in order to stay healthy with the statistics, we could have left everything untouched and not adjusted anything. And in that context, people statistically would have been better off, but they would have starved because they would have been unable to buy anything in the supermarket. So what we decided to do was to acknowledge the true situation, because basically that way products would again appear on supermarket shelves. And that acknowledgement meant 57% poor, which is the figure recorded in January 2024. On the other hand, inflation was running at 1% a day when we first took office, and it sped up even more during the second week in December. Wholesale inflation, which is the one that is predicted, was 54% monthly. I know there's a whole criticism of the annualized approach when I say that this on an annual basis means 17,000%. And what I do in using that figure is to highlight the imbalances we had. And the money overhang was twice as high as the one we had during the Rodrigazo crisis in the 70s, which led the inflation rate to soar. So there was a risk of inflation rising 12-fold. And also, we were left with 4 monetary bases maturing within 1 day at the central bank. This was interest-bearing liabilities, which meant that in only 1 day we could have quintupled the amount of money. And quintupling prices would have not been that unlikely, considering the pace of things. And we had peso-denominated debt maturities amounting to $90 billion. So if you consider all of that, Argentina could have reached 15 or 17,000 in inflation with all of that money amount. It could have happened. But, and of course, if the money demand had not fallen, which was not the case. So I can't obviously provide these explanations in public or to the public in general, because people don't necessarily have to know about economics. So I use a simplification by annualizing the figure. And that situation would have also involved widespread default, as we would have been unable to honor our peso-denominated debt. We wouldn't have been able to honor our trade and commercial debt. We wouldn't have been able to honor a debt at large. So this would have led to a commercial bankruptcy in our economy, which would have made things even harder. Besides, Argentina was facing a high tax burden situation. So the question is, how did we get into this mess, since there had already been 2 hyperinflation processes? And in order to start to see how the model unfolded, you see, I talked about the caste model during my election campaign. And the caste model actually comprises 2 elements. There's this abhorrent notion of socialists that say that where there's a need, a right is born. The trouble is, needs are infinite. And those rights need to be paid for by someone, and resources are finite. So we have infinite needs and finite resources. And of course, for us economists, that is not a problem, because we know that in a free market economy, that can be addressed effectively. But that's not the solution that politicians like. Politicians prefer to use a much more brutal and violent method called social justice. Social justice is an aberration from a moral point of view. And naturally, as is to be expected, it will yield bad results. The question is anyone of those of you here for theft? I think no one, right? Clearly, in fact, it's a sin. Stealing is wrong. It's a sin. We've known this ever since Moses came down from the Sinai with the tablets, and one of the commandments was, "Thou shalt not steal." And besides, social justice entails an equal treatment before the law. Would anyone be in favor of some people having privileges, some being rewarded, others being punished by the law? Would anyone be against equality before the law? Well, social justice is abhorrent because it entails theft and unequal treatment before the law. So you have two individuals and you steal part of the income of one of them and give that to another. So there's the theft and there's the unequal treatment before the law. And that, in addition, creates a serious incentives problem because the one who generates wealth gets punished and the one who makes a fuss and cries injustice, if that one gets money, then the incentive is for you to make a fuss and holler and complain rather than work, which generates an incentive system that is incompatible with progress. And this also has an impact on the quality of life of a society, not only because of the economic damage, but because of the damage as regards the links between and among individuals, fostering a society of people who feel envy and creates hostility, and people end up living in a theoretical class struggle. The quality of relations is really bad. Society becomes polarized and hatred prevails because someone produces wealth, gets it stolen, and someone else says that they have the right to appropriate the other one's wealth. So it's as if you were living in a constant war. And all of this because you have embraced poor economic theory. As Hayek said, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists. Actually, I would say Marx was actually brutally disproved, I would say, by Eugene von Barberg in a book on the Marxist system, in which he proved all of the system's inconsistencies. Marx had already realized when Menger presented the principles of political economics. And besides, the process was trampled underfoot by Mises in his book on socialism, where he explained that socialism couldn't work due to the economic calculation problem. And in the Road to Serfdom, Hayek showed how interventions led to that sinister system. And many actually think that the empirical evidence to the effect that real socialism doesn't work was 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the actual evidence that such ideas don't work was in 1961, when they had to build the wall. So basically, the question is, why do so many continue to embrace this rubbish, this trash, if they were defeated as regards the value theory, as regards the design of the theory structure, if they were defeated in terms of the dynamics or in terms of economic calculation and even in terms of the empirical evidence, why do they continue to uphold this? Because Rothbard's exploitation theory, the precedent theory relative to Marx's exploitation theory, uses the labor value theory as a mechanism to explain exploitation. And that is the moral foundation, and hence the envy, the hatred, and the resentment. Now, that said, what is the consequence of the social justice program? The consequence is that that needs to be corrected with the state's clause. They don't believe in the invisible hand. They believe in the clause of the state. They believe in stealing from one to give to another, as if there were a justification. I mean, I want to do charity with the group on the left by stealing from the group on the right. So I come along, point a gun at your head, and take your money away to give it to them. It's abhorrent. It's an aberration. How can I possibly explain to this group that I'm stealing from them to do charity? Charity is not at gunpoint. It has to arise naturally, not through violence. This can only be remedied by the market, but they don't believe in that. So social justice first starts as fiscal deficit, as increased public spending. And so now comes the problem as to how to finance this, because it's a bit violent to point a gun at this poor group's heads. And besides, what does a politician do when they're populists? They try to get someone else to foot the bill without anyone getting to see that. The first thing they use as a tool, I mean a politician, right? They use debt. And why do they use indebtedness? Because debt is future taxes. And so today's party, which this group will enjoy, which, by the way, have no doubt, they're all going to vote for the politician who does that, of course, to the detriment of the other group. This is profoundly immoral because they are passing on the bill of today's party to future generations. People who haven't yet even been born have to pay for that party. So taking on debt is absolutely immoral, and this is why zero deficit is a non-negotiable principle of our economic policy. Zero deficit is not just for the sake of it. It's a moral definition. It goes beyond macroeconomics. It's a moral issue. You can't shift the burden of today's party to future generations. And in fact, all of you know that we are working on a program to get new financing in order to repay the Treasury's debt to its largest creditor, which happens to be the central bank. So that the central bank's creditors, the peso holders, will get out of that fraud situation caused by previous governments who would use the central bank reserves and undermine the quality of the assets that backed debt. And this is no minor matter, because the more insolvent the central bank, the higher the price level needed to actually dilute the monetary liabilities. So the long-term price level gets higher. If I take today's price level and measure against that other price level, the line, the slope of that line is the implicit inflation rate. So as we continue to clean up the central bank's balance sheet, something that we've been doing systematically, that will mean a replenishment with lower, high or long-term prices and with a much lower implicit rate, which is the way to end inflation once and for all. The other way to do this would be to print money. And money printing creates inflation. For many years, in Argentina, there used to be this nonsense said that inflation was multi-causal, and those of us who defended the monetary hypothesis regarding the cause of inflation were regarded as mad. So saying that inflation is caused by multiple factors is like saying that a skeleton is fat or that a whore is a virgin or things like that. You know, but we had to come along to prove that inflation was actually a monetary phenomenon. But that inflation, at the end of the day, is in the nature of a tax charged to the most vulnerable. In fact, one of the things we were most convinced of was that by lowering the inflation rate, we would lower poverty. And indeed, poverty has gone down from 57 to 33% on a monthly basis. So it's gone down 24% in a little over a year. In only 13 months' time, we have lifted over 10 million Argentines out of poverty. So that goes to show how important it was to continue to insist on the monetary nature of inflation. And finally, when politicians can no longer use debt, because in fact Argentina has been a serial defaulter, Argentina has pursued aberrations with its currency, has actually deleted 13 zeros of its currency and continued to do so. Anyway, there comes a point when this is no longer sustainable. So politicians always choose to raise taxes, and that is why we have a country with one of the world's highest tax burdens. So this is why Argentina has the high debt problems it has, the high inflation, the high tax burden. Or, this is also very important, no doubt, the brilliant economy minister I have, Luis Toto Caputo, who's with us and is certainly the best economy minister in all of Argentina's history. During one of his first speeches, he actually explained a wonderful thing. The core problem in Argentina is fiscal deficit. Last year, we were the first administration in 124 years to have had a surplus on the financial line. Others say, hold on, there were other years in which that was also the case. True, but we weren't servicing our debt. So we weren't paying interest, basically. The first time this happened, while at the same time honoring all of our commitments, was last year. In fact, since 1901 and until 2024, Argentina went through 22 crises, of which 20 had a fiscal origin, and that had to do with a high fiscal imbalance or extravagant fiscal imbalance. And it's not just about the impact this has on debt, or the situation as regards inflation or the tax burden. One of the things that has been done recurrently by governments in Argentina has been to introduce price controls. And when you have price controls, this creates a shortage. And there were, for example, laws that dealt with the obligation to have certain goods available and in stock. There was a so-called shelves law. Crazy. It's like trying to stop gravity, and trying to do all sorts of weird and outrageous things. Or consider the typical populist situation that there used to be during the Kirchner era with fiscal imbalance. Of course, as they were so terrible, they had no market access. They would finance through money printing, which would lead to inflation. And as inflation arose, in order to try to prevent it from going up further, they would set the exchange rate, which would lead to the loss of international or foreign currency reserves. And as they wanted to prevent that, they would introduce the currency controls. So what we inherited was a monstrosity. Now it is much, much less. Now, what are these currency controls? An artificial mechanism to artificially keep the money demand at a certain level. And again, it's ridiculous because one thing that happens is that this does violence to the consumption patterns. Argentinians were well known for buying dollars in order to preserve the value of the money. And the government, on the other hand, wanted people to hold pesos, which artificially increased the money demand and also had an impact in terms of the inflationary tax that was also a hallmark of these processes. What underlies all of this is fiscal imbalance, and fiscal imbalance entails a moral foundation. And when we took office, consolidated fiscal deficit was 15% of GDP, 5% was the Treasury, and 10% was the central bank, in a process of endogenous money printing. Even if we had actually remedied the fiscal imbalance, and this was brilliantly explained by Minister Caputo, even if we had put the fiscal accounts in order on the first day, which we actually did within the first month in office, we put the accounts in order. You see, what's most interesting is that even if we had done that, we wouldn't have averted hyperinflation, because we had 4 monetary bases maturing within a day. If we had followed the recommendation of raising the rate as had been suggested to us, this would have become an unmanageable snowball, and inflation would have been an issue. And besides, as I said, we had peso debt maturing to the tune of $90 billion, and we had debt abroad, $125 million, in addition to the failed program with the IMF. Our foreign currency reserves were negative by $12 billion, and the previous administration printed money tantamount to 28% of GDP, and much of that was during the election year. And it also created a monstrous mechanism called CIRA, which required import permits, which gave access to dollars at the official exchange rate. Interesting coincidence, the exchange rate differential was 200%. So it was true fraud. We also had outstanding dividend debt amounting to $10 billion, and I also told you about the pace of inflation. So right from day one, we decided to apply a shock therapy program. The idea being to reach zero deficit during 2024. And we were told that would be impossible, that you couldn't adjust by more than 1% of GDP, that politics wouldn't allow that, and what have you. And actually, thanks to the excellent work done by Minister Caputo's team, in our first month in office, we achieved financial balance, even though during the first month we paid interest. The original adjustment was 7 points of GDP, and 2 points we used to provide social support to those who needed it. And after 6 months, we also cleaned up the balance sheets of the central bank. And this was a total of 15% as regards the adjustment. And the job of the central bank president, Mr. Bausili, and the finance secretary, Mr. Kirno, did a great job. As we continued to sustain fiscal balance over the course of the months, we were also able to recover debt markets and get the central bank debt out and take it to the treasury, because actually that debt had always pertained to the treasury. And you see what the previous administration did was to use tricks to place central bank bonds. The central bank would issue, and then the interest-bearing liabilities would crop up. They were huge and led to a quasi-fiscal deficit of 10% of GDP. But as we stabilized the economy and exhibited solvency, we were able to take that central bank debt to the place it needed to be, which was the treasury. And in 6 months' time, we were able to do that, which meant a true adjustment that is interesting because we brought wholesale inflation down from 54%, and actually all indicators are pointing to around 1%. This month it was 1.5 wholesale, but the previous month was 0.8. The basic household basket was showed 0.9. The building industry is also 0.9. So all figures point to deflation in dollars, as the crawling peg was 2%. And if you look at the consumer price index, it's 1.5. So all of the figures are below the crawling peg, also considering U.S. inflation. And one of the things that they told us was that by lowering inflation in this way, we would destroy economic activity, and that this would be tantamount to blowing up the activity level and would make it crumble down, and the number of the poor and extreme poor would skyrocket. And actually, when you look at other experiences in history, adjustments by half what we have done have led to GDP losses of 15%. And on a quarterly basis, we had a GDP with a statistical carryover of minus 2.8%. And according to the latest data, the quarterly frequency will be less than 12%, which means that there has been expansion during the program. And that is actually true, because if I look at the GDP data on a monthly basis, this is the monthly economic activity indicator. If you look at the year-on-year period, December to December, GDP grew by 4%. So we made the greatest adjustment in history. We lowered inflation, and this had an expansionary effect as well. I think the economy books on fiscal adjustment should definitely save a chapter for the job that our minister, Toto Caputo, has done.
But as I was saying, that's not it. We also had unemployment not go up. We are creating jobs in a way that Argentina hadn't seen since 2011. And in addition to that, salaries in dollars pretty much multiplied threefold. And poverty has fallen by 57% on a month-by-month basis to 33%, again raising 10 million people in the country out of poverty. I do want to include a footnote here. I think it's an important one, since this is where we are today at the IDB. In my trajectory to being a national representative and ultimately being here as a president, I have done a lot of work on the efficiency of public spending. And the worst area in the world used to be Latin America, and the worst of all was Argentina. I tend to usually go for opera references, and I'm thinking more of literary references, so I'm off today. But Argentina had technical inefficiencies that were the equivalent of 7 percentage points of GDP. In the meeting I just held with Elon and other members of the organization, I was told that that has been halved. And so we have another 3.5 points to decrease yet. But it seems to me that out of all of this, there's an interesting part we can use to tell the story, and that is why all of these adjustments didn't lead to a recessive outcome. And I think it's important it wasn't recessive, mainly because the adjustment actually impacted the government. It fully impacted the government. Which means, if you think about when you have a parasite running around in your body, you don't kill the body, you kill the parasite. And so we want to go after that parasite in every way we can. And so in that regard, we continue to believe that the government is a criminal organization that lives off of a source of income that comes from taxes. And nobody pays taxes voluntarily. This is why one of the things that we continue to maintain is that while we try to ensure that growth can be permanent, we want to lower taxes. As a matter of fact, we just did away with the national country tax that was a big source of revenue. Same for regional economies and the retention taxes. What we have used also for improving our crop activity. We've also been able to get rid of many tariffs and taxes and other rates. All of that to say that a lot of progress is being done. So, with all of that said, what is the point? Well, stabilization is well underway, and how can we increase growth? It is true that on the one part we have a cyclical recovery. That's what we are experiencing today. We're seeing a recovery of stocks, and with real salaries and retirements in real terms, that is also driving up demand. But there are other reasons we can come to long-term growth. I could talk about the adjustment that we carried out, the 15 percentage points that I mentioned before in fiscal deficit that had lower levels of savings and fewer investment opportunities. And so making that fiscal adjustment and moving the government out of the way, that helps savings increase so that the private sector can invest. We do need to come out of these constraints, these price constraints and controls, so that we can actually grow. And that can give us the savings that we can use to finance the private sector. Currently, the banks are actually doing bank work, and they're not simply out bailing out the players or rescuing the players. In addition to that, we carried out structural reforms. The structural reforms in the base law and the others all amount to 800 systemic reforms. That's 8 times larger than the Menem reform, which was the largest in the history of the country. This is why we say that Menem's administration was the best in Argentina, with reforms and with a lot of success coming from the convertibility efforts. In a single year, we have reached that with only 15% in the lower house and in the Senate 10%, and we carried out a program that was 8 times larger. We also have a successful stabilization program, more successful than convertibility, because our terms of results in dollar inflations are better than they have been in the past. We're currently seeing deflation without having gone through prior hyperinflation, without having expropriated, without price controls, without putting exchange rate controls in place, and also rebuilding rates. This is why I've always said that this is the best administration in history, not because of me, but because of the stupendous ministers I have by my side. I'm very proud of them. I appreciate their great task. Usually all I have to say is point the way, but they're the ones who are getting us there. It's a pleasure to have them. That said, that's not the end of the story. Halfway through the year, we had on our team Dr. Federico Strocineri very openly join us, and that was for the Ministry of Deregulation. Federico is going through something that's very similar to what Toto and I have been working with. We have a very symbiotic relationship. Federico and I are going through a similar experience. And so in that half of the year that Federico joined us for, that second half of last year, he got rid of 900 regulations. Those are also like structural reforms. And so in real terms, we are talking about 1,700 structural reforms. But that's not all. And here, perhaps I can give you an inside story. Federico is carrying out what's called the Chainsaw Plan 2.0. It's going to move towards other government reforms. I'll remind everyone that there were 18 ministries when we started. There were 24 in real terms. Now there are 9, and actually we're moving towards 8. And we want to also reduce the size of a few of the other offices and agencies. In the first half of January, I told my entire team, you're on vacation. They all came back in the second half of the month. And in the beginning of February, Minister Strocineri came to the Olivos residence. That's when he said that he was very concerned because of how slowly we were acting. His suggestion had to do with redefining a few legal areas just to make things more dynamic, make the reforms move in a more streamlined way. And what Federico said, being a minister who I'm pretty happy with every day, everything that he is doing away with in the government, he always makes me very happy. And so when he said that, I thought, well, I can't believe that my mind was somewhere else, and I wasn't keeping track of the things that keep me happy. And so I took out pen and paper, looked at the numbers of reforms in 2 weeks. And how many do you think he got? I mean, he was pretty angry. 65. In 15 days, we're talking about 2 weeks, 65 regulations went away, and he said we're still moving too slowly. So how can I not be happy with my ministers? I mean, they are a never-ending economic libertarian machine. Decree 125 is one I really appreciate. It came out a few days ago, and it urges the different ministries to put together a digest. And I think it's pure art, and you'll see the shock come from once you get a view of what it is. Argentina has 42,000 laws. Manuel, is that right? Is it 42,000 laws? 70,000 decrees, and 220,000 resolutions, memos. Of course, a ministry can eliminate the resolutions and the ministries as well. And thanks to the base law and some of the others, I can use my special powers to strike some of those as well. So what we are suggesting is that every ministry put together a compilation of what they use. And guess what we're going to do once we have that compilation ready? 30 days. That's how long they have. Anything that was left out of these compiled lists will be eliminated. And this is because you're going to see that there are some things that we don't even realize exist. We know that there's a beneficiary for it. I'll give you an example. What happened with the scrap metal was very interesting. We couldn't export it. That was actually banned. But there is a price to scrap metal. And so that scrap metal would remain in domestic markets and the price of the scrap metal would fall, and it was very cheap. And that, of course, was very beneficial for a company and was harmful for all of those who had to hold on to the scrap metal. And so, to me, that wasn't going in favor of liberties. And so we eliminated that regulation. Obviously, now scrap metal goes for a market rate. And the business that was harmed is a very big company, and of course, tapped its arsenal of foot soldiers to try to destabilize the economic program. Or say, for example, the issues we see with a watermelon exporter, someone looking to export watermelons. And I say watermelon because I don't know if in Spanish the other word is the same for all of us. And I know I'm going on and on, but I just have a few more examples. I wanted to share some fun examples. And I promise, it's the last example, and then I'll bring it to a close. And so you have this person who wanted to export watermelons to Paraguay, and he had an agreement with the business in Paraguay to export the product. But turns out that given Argentinian regulations, there was exactly a way to do that. And in Paraguay, the business was saying that's not how we need the watermelons. And so what this man had to do was abide by the Argentinian regulations, would load them onto the ship, would change the size and form so that they could reach in the way that it was needed in Paraguay, and that was completely inefficient. And so we did away with that, and there were a lot of people who were not happy, but the watermelon farmers are ecstatic. It's all been great. And now watermelons are cheaper in a destination. And so we're working on reducing taxes. There are two other topics I'd like to raise. One is how we have completely changed the social assistance paradigm in Argentina. I don't remember what the name of that ministry was before, but you had all these names. I think it was social well-being is what it was called before. I mean, that's why I couldn't come up with the name, because my brain just refuses to hold on to these words. We decided to create the Ministry of Human Capital. The Ministry of Human Capital has a very specific connotation in social and economic terms. In social terms, it means I'm not going to just give you the fish. I'm going to teach you to fish. And if you have a business that can actually go into fishing, that would be even better. And so basically it used to go out and provide assistance and help those who are disadvantaged and families. Is also why there was a children's unit that used to focus on children at birth, and that had to do with health and education and employment. The idea was to give people that dignity again of being able to earn their way to getting what they needed and support their families with the help of others. And so this is something that is working, not only because the social policy is bearing fruit, even though it was so contentious. We have also been able to take all of those who are managing poverty and remove them from the equation so they don't tap into those resources. But we're also giving the most important tools to the people who need them so that they can actually come out of poverty. And so once this ministry reaches its height, it gets the most that it's ever going to get, then it can go away. And the other can be the ministry that is led by Dr. Schwarzenegger. And at the core, if you look at the history of mankind, at least since 0 AD, per capita GDP increased by 50% between year 0 and 1800, but from 1800 on, while the population was growing tenfold, GDP per capita was growing 15-fold up until 2023, which is as far as the Angus-Madison numbers go. And so, with that in mind, the question is that on the flip side of that, you have actually increasing returns. And so if we look at it from an economic perspective, that means that if I want to make it very technical, I have non-convexual structures, or if I make it more understandable for the non-economists, I have a problem of market concentration. And in the most polarized way, we'd be talking about monopolies. And the problem is that when you regulate monopolies and you want to make them look like competitive businesses aligned with the neoclassical paradigm, what that results in is actually in killing increasing returns, which means that there is no longer economic growth. And so, to the extent that we can bring the chainsaw to these regulations, what we're doing is not only gaining economic liberties, but also increasing economic growth. And all of this, as I see it, comes from the fact that the neoclassical analysis of things is wrong. For anyone wishing to see that truth, I suggest that you read the Munai Roelvaart article, Monopoly and Competition. That was a very enlightening article for me. Because when I read it, I had been teaching microeconomics and economic balance class for 25 years. And I then learned that monopolies aren't inherently evil. They're not bad, except for the monopolies that the government creates. I was so moved by the article that I not only became a libertarian, but I also became an anarcho-capitalist, which philosophically I still am. That means that I am going to continue working on making the government become its simplest and reduced form and make sure that liberties go back to everyone in our government. Long live freedom.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. We appreciated the examples, the watermelon, the octopus. I thought that the octopus was known for all the hands it had and all the tentacles, and we're going to use that for the government, but perhaps I got that wrong. Well, what's important here is to think about how we here at the IDB can study this case and use it in conversations we hold with our 26 countries. Fiscal consolidation, fiscal adjustments, how to talk about that in a way that leads to expansion an adjustment that can streamline, that can create the necessary conditions for the private sector to step in as another point. And the last point is how to ensure that growth can be sustainable. Because when we talk to heads of state and we say we're going to make a 5, 6, or 15% adjustment, they say, well, we can't survive that. Well, but if we say it can be expensive and it can lead to long-term growth. And so the question is, how can I respond to a head of state so that they know and can be certain that growth in the private sector will come? Well, the first point is that the adjustment doesn't have to hit the private sector. It has to come down on the public sector. That's where the magic lies. Secondly, you need to believe in it. And I'll talk to you about what happened during my first cabinet meeting. I had already agreed with Minister Caputo that we were going to, again, just bring out the chainsaw and slash things across the board in the public sector. And in that context, we also had the different mechanisms to address the social issues during the transition. When we had our first cabinet meeting and I laid out the main principles, all of the lawyers are in the back and they said, we can't do that. And I said, I think it was about maybe 40 degrees out Celsius. I don't know what it would be in Fahrenheit, but it was pretty hot. And I said, and the question is, well, if I go to the street corner and I ask the ice cream seller, what are they going to say? They said, I don't know. And so what I said is that I don't really care about what you think. What I want to hear from you is how we can get it done. Because just saying that it can't be done is easy. Anyone can say that. And I think that changed the way in which ministers started to perceive things. And another important aspect is making it clear. What is the ultimate goal? And also understand the fallacies in economic theory. Can I be crude here? Well, the idea that public works leads to growth and work, that's bullshit. It's not true. What's true is that to get a public works project off the ground, it needs to be financed. And if you finance that based on taking on debt, then that's a future payment for our children, our grandchildren. If I do that with issuing more currency, then punishing the most vulnerable with high inflation. And in addition to all of that, since I am charging taxes, the project that is being implemented that you're seeing is actually destroying other projects and other jobs in other locations. And what people would prefer is not to have that one road. They rather have the other things that they had chosen. And so I am stealing from them. I am taking away from the well-being for things that are not as useful. And let's not forget that there's also the problem of leaks, public spending leaks. And so what we need to keep in mind is that the government is part of the problem and not part of the solution. There's nothing worse than having a politician show up and say, I am the government, I'm here to help. When I see a politician do that, I say, everybody run, because he's coming for your pockets. And so the core issue is understanding what the fallacies are that are used to build the truth on, supposedly, of what the government should be. But again, the government is a criminal organization. You cannot tell me that if you put more thieves out into society, you're going to be better than with fewer thieves. The government is worse than the mafia. Here's a question. How many times did these thieves steal from you over the last year? Not once. Well, the government steals from you every day through taxes. And so how can something so sinister be something that you say if you get rid of it, you're going to be worse off? You're going to be much better off because the government is the thief that will not go away. And it's at a larger scale and also goes by a different and weaker code than the mafia. When people decide to take the red pill and can pull themselves out of the matrix, they'll realize that the government is a problem, and we will see a lot more coming from capitalism. Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I've been told that we have to conclude. AJ Banga as well is waiting for me. So thank you. Everyone in the audience came here to hear from you, to hear about the Argentinian model. As a matter of fact, there were folks who came here to understand what is happening with the issue of the hostages. There are some people here who were former hostages, and they came here specifically to hear about that. I want to thank you for everything, and let's keep working together.